are different. The way
So before you go on, I think just to announce it, to be fair to everybody, I cannot allow more than 3 minutes each to be fair, so it goes on time.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't think I can respond to everything you said. But maybe this going backwards really quick. That 2004 IEO report he talks about was actually, the beginning point with which they went back to look was something in the early 90s, between 90 and 95. That was our problem with it.
85.
It didn't. Well, we can go take a look, but I'm pretty sure it went back to after deficits already been low. That's what we were upset about. Anyway, the difference between the non-program IMF countries and the IMF program countries, I think, also it's a little bit of a red herring, because the book is more broadly about the neoliberal ideas, not the actual IMF conditions. So I mean, I know they overlap, but I'm much more concerned about what students have been taught, and the only thing students have been taught in economics departments for the last 30 years. It's terribly worrying, I think, that how narrow economics, the field of economics, has gotten over the years, the mathematization of the discipline, and how narrow that's got. I would say it's a much broader problem than just IMF. I know I beat up on IMF, but I beat up on IMF because it's a symbol of that thinking. But it's a far bigger problem than that. It's much more pervasive. The old school 70s would say it's the hegemony of these ideas, right, is the problem. And but the other side of that is what Peter raised earlier, is like the IMF don't tell countries what to do. But the only reason we think that is because every central banker and finance minister we complain to in all the developing countries, every time, my whole 9 years of doing it, they say, oh, it's not us, it's not us, it's the IMF, it's the World Bank making us do this. Why do you think so many of them always say that all the time? It would have been so refreshing if just one official in any developing country could have said, well, Rick, here's why I believe it, and whip out all the literature and give me an eloquent explanation of why they believe in neoliberal policies. But not one official ever once, from a health ministry or an education ministry or any finance ministry officials ever said it. Why do you think they fall back and blame you guys, rather than give an eloquent defense of their belief in the policies? I mean, I just would have liked to have seen it once or twice. It would have been great, but I never did. So I mean, what are the perceptions one is left with after that? But I don't think it's that. I think a lot of those guys were sincere and were trained in the universities in the North in the last 30 years, and that was the only thing they were taught. I just think it. That's what I think. But I'm sorry, I don't have time to answer all your things. You're right, industrial policies, as they've been applied in many countries, have been way imperfect. I'll be the first to note that the history is spotty. But to be fair, for every inefficiency that you can point to, I bet you I can go find a success case. Okay? And certainly that's when I'm not just talking about the rich countries either, I'm talking about East Asia. All right? The East Asians had very strict cutoff performance targets when countries weren't meeting them. It didn't work so well in Africa and Asia. There was a lot of corruption and nepotism, as I said earlier. But just to get to your the thing you started with, though, I don't know if you heard my starting point, but this book is not about increasing spending for health. This book is about why isn't the tax base big enough? What's gone wrong with the development model generally? The literature you point to is very inconclusive. We don't know why health spending can be more effective in some countries where they actually spend less than in others. That's what I said, is that the research is inconclusive. I would love to have the answer and be able to tell you. I don't even think the experts who study this stuff professionally day in and day out for years know. And that's why I said that it's inconclusive in the book. I don't know who I cited for that particular one, but that's my understanding of where the research is on that question. And what that means to me is more research needs to be done. And I hope that it is happening, because I would love to know the answer. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, time. but I will try to follow up with you more.
You guys can continue.
Sanjeev, you want to
I think I'll pass. Thank you.
Can Rick have your 3 minutes? Let's go back. So big.
Well, I do think that the issue of more health for money is incredibly important, and the issue of efficiencies. And please, people study it and figure it out. I know that activists have been somewhat involved in trying to fight for efficiencies, because every penny counts. I know the organization I work with was involved in the WHO Positive Synergies project, which was trying to study the impacts of the global health initiatives like PEPFAR, like the Global Fund, and whether they were having positive impacts on health systems and other health needs, or whether they were having negative externalities. That question is very important. We try to discover some important things. It is a crisis that some countries are so inefficient even with the money they have. We need to address that. So I'm completely in favor of more money for the health. I mean, more health for money as well as more money for health. I disagree a little bit with an idea which is stated, I forget who said it, but that the long-term goal would be self-sufficiency of countries. I mean, maybe in the long horizon, but in the short term, like medium term, and what most of us would consider the rest of our lives, some low-income countries are going to need significant external support to reach any reasonable human development goal that we can think of. It's just the way things are unfortunately set up. The issue of the differential spendings by some countries who are very low spending, by India and China, for example, not under the discipline of IMF. Elites don't care about poor people virtually anywhere. I mean, that's not a huge surprise. The question is, when elites can be forced to care for their poor population, will there be policies in place which actually restrict government response? And that would be a tragedy if it was true. And so we think, multiple things can be true at the same time. Yes, poor country elites oftentimes do not care for poor people in their country, and IMF policies and other neoliberal policies can have some impact on countries' willingness and ability to spend appropriately in needed social sectors. Those two things are not inconsistent.
I'll take my chance. So first I want to break the iron grip of history and say I can think of a number of instances where we've gotten it wrong and where I've recognized that I am sorry. That's about the best I can do. And I want to add a comment about India, because I think India is a very interesting example in this regard. India is a country that's followed liberal economic policies for the last 10 or 15 years. It's seen a dramatic, rapid increase in its growth rate and a huge increase in the resources available for all kinds of investments, both public and private. What's interesting, I think, in looking at India from the health sector point of view is that it does have a low level of spending, but it has a fairly high level of spending on social welfare programs. It just chooses to spend its money on social welfare programs more in the form of income transfers and other kinds of direct subsidies to populations, many of which I believe are not very efficient and not very effective, and not to spend them so much on social services like health services. There's some change taking place in this right now. So in part, there is not only an issue about the amount of money that's available, but differences in countries on how they spend this money. And these, again, are very much domestic and, in India's case, historical choices, but very difficult to change. And there's a lot of people in the government of India who would like to change this pattern, but it is very difficult to undo subsidies once they're in place.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. And with that, we are past the time. I don't think there's any way we have no more requests for questions, so I'm going to go ahead and close the event. And I
just want to say, I do take responsibility for any inaccuracies that are in this book, because I did put it together and I've got my name on it. But I just want to just stress one thing, that it's not really just me who's conjured up these things. And I just want to say that, while ActionAid has been especially outspoken, it's just important to know that there's a lot of serious people at a lot of serious institutions around the world who I cite in the book. And I encourage you to look at those sources that I cited. People who've raised concerns about the restrictive nature of the fiscal and monetary policies in the IMF macro framework. So it's not just me speaking about these things. I've done a lot of research on these. I've talked to people in all of these organizations. This is just a partial list. But what I've done in this book is sort of cobble them all together, because I wanted to sort of really paint a picture of concern. But it's not just me. And it's important to know that there's a lot of people in a lot of places who have deep and serious concerns about the efficacy of these policies. So thank you.